Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Gittin Daf Samach Dalet, and we're starting at a new Mishnah at the very bottom of Samach Gimel Amud Beis, and it reads as follows: 2 lines from the bottom, Samach Gimel Amud Beis. Ha'isha she'amra. If a woman says Hiskabel li Giti, if a woman says to a man, let's say the man's name is Shimon the Shliach, and she says to Shimon, "I want you to receive my get on my behalf." So now the Gemara adds in a layer about shlichus that we did not know earlier. That is, tzricha shtei kitei edim. If a woman is going to appoint a man to be the shliach to receive her get, we need 2 sets of edim. Shnaim omrim b'fanenu amra. We need 2 people to identify the fact that she in fact appointed Shimon to be the shliach. The shnaim omrim b'fanenu kibel v'kara. And we need 2 people to say that he, Shimon, the shliach, in fact received the get. We're on the very bottom line of Samach Gimel Amud Beis, and that in fact he received the get and he tore it up. Rashi here says we'll learn about why it was torn up in the Gemara on the Amud Aleph, but that is what the Mishnah writes. She needs 2 kitei edim. So again, if a woman appoints Shimon the shliach, we need a set of edim that says, yes, we saw that she appointed Shimon the shliach, and we need a set of edim that he in fact received the get. And afilu hein harishonim v'hein ha'achronim, you're allowed to have the same edim for both of them, one for the amira and one for the kabbalah and kriya, no problem at all. Or top of Samach Daled Amud Aleph, it could be a mixture of sorts. Echad min harishonim ve'echad min ha'achronim ve'echad mitzaref iman, no problem. Any iteration, any combination of edim, it's okay if the edim are repeated edim. But the short version of this Mishnah is that we in fact need to make sure that there's a kas of edim that identify, that witness the fact that she asked Shimon to be the shliach, and another set that watched Shimon receive the get. The Gemara in Samach Daled Amud Aleph on the second line says, Itmar, the Amoraim have a conversation about this. Let's say in regards to a get, Baal Omer lepikadon. Let's say that Ruvain is married to Rachel. Ruvain takes his get and he gives it over to someone as a pikadon. Please hold this for me. That's it. However, Ushlish, the guy he gave it to, the messenger, he functions as a shliach and Omer legerushin. This is a strange miscommunication. So if I'm Ruvain and you're my shliach, I give it to you thinking it's a pikadon, and you get it thinking that you're supposed to be megarish the wife. So there's a miscommunication of sorts. So mi ne'eman, the Gemara wants to know, who do we believe? Do we believe the husband, and therefore this get is not functional because he only wanted it to be a pikadon? Or do we believe the shlish, the shaliach, and therefore she's divorced? Huge nafkaminas. The Gemara says this is a machlokes in the Amoraim. Rav Huna Amar Baal Ne'eman, Rav Chizda Amar Shlish Ne'eman. According to Rav Huna, we trust the husband. He's the one who's in charge. He's the one who has the mitzvah of v'chasav lav nasan biyada, and he didn't want to be nasan biyada. All he wanted to do was put it in pikadon. Rav Chizda Amar Shlish Ne'eman. Rav Chizda says we believe the messenger, and let's analyze each of these shitos. Rav Huna Amar Baal Ne'eman. Rav Huna says, we're 5 lines down on Samach Daled Amud Aleph. Rav Huna says that we trust the Baal. Why? De'im Isa, if it's in fact the case to Gerushin Yahave Nehale, if it was in fact that Ruvain wanted to divorce this wife, if he wanted to divorce her, why would he give it to him? Ledida Hava Yoav La Nehala. He would have just given it straight to her. Why bother with the shliach? Elamai, it must be that it's lipikadon, and therefore, according to this first approach of Rav Huna, we therefore follow the Baal. However, the Gemara says that Rav Chizda says, Amar Shlish Ne'eman, we trust the shliach. Why do we trust the shliach? Says the Gemara, Teha Hemne. Look, if I give a man my get as a pikadon, that means I trust him. If he then says, I know Ruvain's intentions and it was really meant to be for divorce, because I, the husband, trusted him to be about pikadon, I therefore trust the shliach, to say that in fact this is a gerushin. It's a little bit odd. I'll ask a question that should be done by the Rishonim. Why is this a conversation? The husband's in charge. It's shliach osa shlichuso, right? So it should be the case. It should be simple that we just follow the husband. But the Gemara has a halachic assumption in the name of Rav Chizda that because I gave it over to Shimon the shliach, that's a raya that I trust Shimon the shliach, and therefore what he says goes. It's just an interesting shita.
If you think of it differently, how else did it get to his name?
It's true, but why wouldn't it have been? But if I'm saying as the husband that it's for a pikadon, And there's an argument now. I'm the husband. I'm saying pikadon. You're the shlish, and you're saying no. He doesn't mean that. He means it's for gerushin. That's not normal. So Rav Huna's shita is a shtikla mechudash. I understand the flow of events. I understand why we would say the shlish is trustworthy, but it doesn't really make sense that that we would trust him. Nevertheless, that's what the Gemara says in the name of Rav Chizda, and that is all approaches number 1 and 2. And now the Gemara asks Akasha. Masiv Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba brings a brisa, Samach Daled Manalef, 8-9 lines down. We know from elsewhere in Shas, this is a Tosefta here. Tosefta in Bava Metzia, and we learned it earlier in this Masechta, and we'll see it again in the next. Hodas Baldin Kimea Edim Dami, that when a man admits something, it's as if he's 100 people, and the shlish ne'eman mishnehem, and the shlish is more trusted than both of them. That's interesting. Ketzad, what's the case? Ze omer kach v'ze omer kach, shlish ne'eman. So we see here a raya brura, black on white, for the shita of Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda is of the opinion that the shlish is ne'eman. So the Gemara says over here, we have a raya for Rav Chizda, and therefore a kasha on Rav Huna. Says the Gemara, it's true that on paper it looks like a raya, but it's actually not a raya. Why not? Because in that case, shiny mamon to isyahi v'lemechila. When I'm giving you money for something, there's a certain mechila that's taking place. I'm transacting, I'm taking care of an issue. I owe you money, I'm lending you money, something's happening. But when I take a get and put it in your possession as a pikadon, I'm not solving any financial problems. And therefore, the Gemara distinguishes that over there, in the case of Hodas Baldin, where we see that we trust the shlish, that's a case of mumminus. But we're not dealing with a case of mumminus. We're dealing with a case of get, and therefore the cases aren't comparable. The Gemara says that's not true. V'hatanya, v'chein legittin. We see black on white here that a get is included in this conversation. So maybe we should therefore say that that this works even for a get, and a shlish should be ne'eman. Again, a support for Rav Chizda and a kasha and Rav Huna. Says the Gemara, no, gite mamon. We're not talking about a get like a get isha. We're talking about a gite mamon, a document that's really, we say the word get, but it doesn't mean a get for marriage. It's just a get for mumminus. It's just a document. We have another sentence, another brisa that says it's also true for shtaros in general, which means that the Gittin one must be talking about Gite Isha. Says the Gemara, those two lines of v'chein legittin and v'chein l'shtaros midi gabe hadadi tanya. You can't infer from one about the other because the two of them were not taught in the same brisa, and therefore we don't know how to make a proper diuk on them, and therefore it's not a raya. So we tried to bring a raya for Rav Chizda that we trust the shlish, kamash malan that we don't have a raya from here. Next, Tnan, third of the way down on Samach Daled Amud Aleph. Ha'isha she'amra his kabali giti. If a woman says, I'd like you, Shimon, to be my shliach. We had said in our Mishnah, tzricha shtei kitei edim. We need two groups of edim. We need the first set of edim, shnaim sheyomer befanenu amra. We need two people to say that they witnessed Rachel going over to Shimon saying, I want you to be my shliach lekabbalah. And as well, the shnaim sheyomer befanenu kibel v'kara. And I need another set of people, another pair of edim to say that Shimon, the shliach, in fact, received this get and he tore it up. Says the Gemara, ve'amai. Why do I need all of these edim? Lehemne l'shlish. This was a case of shlichus. So if you're saying that we trust the shlish, then our Mishnah has all of these extra edim. Why? It must be elamai. It must be that we don't trust the shlish, which means, like we started, we're like Rav Huna now. The Rav Huna says that we only trust the Baal and not the shlish. Beautiful argument from our own Mishnah. The Gemara says, no. Mika nafik gita mituse yade dilehemne. Can this shlish at this point produce the document with which the divorce took place to show that the shlish is actually correct? If the shlish had a document, no problem. But what did our Mishnah say about the document? That he had to tear up the document. So now you want to say that the shlish is neman, but he has no raya that this divorce actually took place because we made him tear it up. So says the Gemara, Tenach, I could understand this argument in regards to Amra. I could understand in regards to Amira. By the Amira, we need to have two edim that said that Shimon was going to be the shliach. But Kibel Lamali, why then do we need to have somebody witnessing the Kabbalah, these two edim that our Mishnah indicates? Why do they have to see the two Eidim, why do the two Eidim have to see Shimon the Shliach receiving the get on her behalf? So now the Gemara ties this back into an old conversation. Amar Amar Rava. What do you have, Rava? What is it? Rava? But it's really not clear from the Gemara.
Okay, let's flip a coin.
We could flip a coin, but I'm just gonna look for a second. I don't know why that happened. Yeah, in the Tosfos Rid it says Rava properly, but like how are we supposed to know it's not Rabba? Like I don't know how we're supposed to know that. Okay, so the Tosfos Rid says that it's Rava. Amar Rava Hamani. Why is it that we needed witnesses to see that the husband actually gave the get to Shimon the Shliach, who was the Shliach on behalf of the wife? Because Rabbi Eliezer, he Amar Ede Mesira Karti. What actually brings about the severance between the husband and the wife is the witnessing of the Mesira of the get. Asks the Gemara halfway down on Samach Daled Kara Lamali. Why does our Mishnah say that we need to tear up the get? Because Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, B'shas Hashmad Shanu, or B'shas HaGzeira in some versions of the Gemara, the Oz V'Hadar is so confident that it's Shas Hashmad, it didn't even make a note about it. But in Rabbi Reznik's Gemara, when he taught it, he didn't say Shas Hashmad, it just said Shas, what does it say? Shas HaGzeira? Shas HaGzeira. So what was going on over here? So it says Rashi, 15 lines or so from the bottom, 3/4 of the way down, Dibur HaMaschil, Shas Hashmad Hava. Does Rashi say Shas Hashmad for you? Anybody? Rashi is 2/3 of the way from the bottom. Dibur Maschil Shas Hashmad Hava, Shagazru al HaMitzvos. So the Chacham, at that time, the Goyim said you're not allowed to do mitzvos, and getting divorced is a mitzvah. What? My Dibur HaMaschil is Shas Hashmad Hava.
Interesting.
Well, I'm okay with Shinui Nuschos, but tell me about it. I don't want to be like T-boned by another. Shagazir al HaMitzvos. So the reason why we had to tear this up is because, and it's odd that the Goyim would have known that divorce is a mitzvah, because it's a really atypical mitzvah. It's really quite an atypical mitzvah, and it's very uncommon in its nature because we promote marriage. We try not to break up marriages, but of course, when necessary, it is obviously the case, and therefore, that's why the Gemara says Kara Lamalei, because of Shas Hashmad. All of that is part one. Let's continue. Amar Rabba Umod Rav Huna Di Amra Ihi. If she were to have claimed Lididi Amar Li Shlish Dilagerushin Yahavene Hale, the Shlish told me that my husband, Ruvain, gave him the get in order to divorce me, Mehemna. She's believed. So now we have a problem. The problem is that mi ikamidi, de shlish gufei lo mehemen, v'ihi mehemna. We had said on the top of the page, in the name of Rav Huna, that we trust the husband and we don't trust the shlish. Okay. But now the wife comes along and she supports the shlish. We believe her and she's divorced. That means that she's halachically divorced, but we don't believe the shlish for saying the same exact thing. So that's an odd separation. How can it be that we categorically don't listen to the shlish, but we do listen to the woman? So therefore, that can't be the case. Ella says the Gemara, I Amra, if she says, Kamoidi di legerushin yahavene hale, in front of me, it was given to him for a divorce. That's different than mehemna. Why over there? Because here we have a migu. And a migu, just to speak it outside, is because I could have claimed X, which is a better claim, and didn't claim X. Believe me when I make a lesser claim. That's the concept of a migu. I could have argued X and paid 0. I'm arguing Y and paying a fine. I'm obviously telling the truth. So the Gemara says, what's her migu? What's her raya? Migu di ibaya amra lidida yahavene hala baal, that the husband gave it to her directly. Because what was the flow of events? The husband gave to the shlish gave to the isha. So you should believe me that when I tell you what happened with the husband, the results are the same, and I could have given you a less complicated argument. I'm holding the get right now, and I could have lied to you and said that my husband gave it to me directly. Nobody would have known. There's no cameras, there's no CCTV. So therefore, we see that she's believed in this case. What if the case was slightly different? We're going back really to the beginning of our Gemara, and this is version 2 of our Gemara. Let's say, and we are 3/4 of the way from the bottom of the page, Baal Omer Lagerushin, a husband gives over a get to Shimon the Shliach, and he does so for the purposes of getting divorced. Vishlish Omer Lagerushin. Everybody's on the same page. The Shliach also says that there's Gerushin. However, Vihi Omeres Nasan Liva Avad. There were no witnesses, but she claims that she received the get and she lost it. But there's no witnesses. So what's the din? Because we learned in our Mishnah that, especially according to Rabbi Elazar, that Edi Masira is Karti. So without somebody seeing the actual transaction of the get to the Isha, would we trust her claim that she is in fact divorced? Nobody saw it happen. She says that I got it from him, Nasan Liva Avad. So says the Gemara, this doesn't work because Amar Rav Yochanan have a davar shebe'erva, vein davar shebe'erva pachos mishnayim. Our Mishnah, the undercurrent of our Mishnah, when it requires that we have witnesses, watch Shimon the Shliach receive the get on behalf of Rachel, the now ex-wife. The reason we need people there is because of this idea that ein davar shebe'erva pachos mishnayim. So therefore, if a woman makes a claim that she received a get and lost it, she can't produce the document anymore. There were no witnesses. She's not divorced. So her claim is useless. Says the Gemara, ve'amai, ve'lehemne l'shlish. Remember our case. Shimon the Shliach handed it to her. Go over to Shimon and say, did you hand her this document? But we don't say that. Why not? Must be we don't trust the shlish. Back to our starting conversation. We wanted to know, do we hold like Rav Huna that we only trust the Baal, or do we hold like the shlish who says that they're divorced? We see a raya brura from here that we don't trust the shlish. And says the Gemara, that's not a raya. Here we can't trust the shlish, but for technical reasons. We're not able to believe him because he can't produce a document either because she lost it and because he didn't have it in his possession anymore. So we can't trust the shlish, but you can't bring a raya from here that a shlish is not trustworthy. All you can say is that he's not good in this case. So the Gemara says, fine. What about v'lehemne labal? Let's go back to Reuven. Reuven was married to Rachel. Rachel says to Shimon the Shliach, I want you to receive. Reuven walks over the get to Shimon the Shliach, and then the claim comes in. This we all know. And then she says, Nasan biadi ve'avad. But why can't we trust the husband? 6 lines from the bottom. V'lehemne labal. Da'amar Reb Chia bar Avin, Amar Rav Yochanan, Baal sha'amar gerashti es ishti, ne'eman. We have this case scenario where we're saying that she's not divorced. We said we can't trust her because she can't produce the document, and ein davar shebe'erba pachos mishnayim. We can't trust the shlish because he too has no proof of what he's done. But we do have precedent that the husband should be trusted, that if he says gerashti es ishti, then he should be ne'eman. Says the Gemara, I agree with you in principle, but Mika Amar Girashti, in our case, did the husband say that he divorced her? He just said nothing. The husband's name is not even mentioned in the Mishnah. We don't know what we're talking about. Let's go to the next possibility. The lema, perhaps we should say chazaka, halachic chazaka of shliach oseh shlichuso. Let's say a father sends me to do a bris and never hears about the bris ever again. Should he assume his son is an Arel? Can he include him b'chabura on Pesach? Yes or no? That depends. If we're under the assumption the chazak of shliach oseh shlichuso, then great. Here's an example. To Amar Rav Yitzchak, ha'omer l'shlucho. If I say to a shliach, "Tzei v'kadesh li isha stam," I want you to marry me to any woman that fits a certain set of parameters, and then umeis shlucho, but the shliach dies, and we didn't get the report back of if he actually ended up marrying me to someone. Aser b'chol hanashim sheba'olam. Chazaka shliach oseh shlichuso. You will forever be a bachelor. So therefore, maybe we should go under the assumption that she's divorced because shliach oseh shlichuso. What was Shimon the Shliach's job? His job was to receive the get on behalf of the woman, on behalf of Rachel, to receive it from Reuven. So maybe this is why we should assume she's divorced. So says the Gemara, when do we say chazaka shliach oseh shlichuso hani mili lechumra aval lekula lo? This is big in the world of lamdus in regards to shlichus, that seemingly shliach oseh shlichuso is only used lekula. Okay, we still are stuck. She's still not able to be divorced. What? Hani mili l'chumra, aval l'kula lo. Oh, sorry.
No big deal.
That's quite a big deal. It's quite the opposite, especially in the lumdus realms. It's not just for our shakla v'tari. So let me say it more properly. Nice catch. Thank you. So when do we say shliach oseh shlichuso hani mili l'chumra? That's only true to create a scenario of chumra. Aval l'kula lo, but to be mekel, we don't allow for the usage of shliach oseh shlichuso. And this makes a lot more sense. And in our case, where we're trying to get this woman out of a marriage, we don't say shliach oseh shlichuso. We've tried 3 or 4 attempts already to get her out of this marriage, and none of them are working because there were no edim that actually witnessed the Masira from Shimon to her. So then the Gemara says, we have another reason to trust her. Perhaps we should say, top of Samach Daled Amud Beis, V'lehemna ledida midirav Hamnuna. Maybe we have precedent to listen to her because of Rav Hamnuna. Damar Rav Hamnuna, ha'isha she'amra lebaila, a woman who says to her husband, Geirashtani, you divorced me, ne'emenes. Why would she be believed to say that? Chazaka, ein ha'isha me'iza paneha bifnei baila. A woman will not stand in front of her husband and say, by the way, you divorced me already, when it isn't true. We have a halachic assumption, and possibly even a social one, that a woman would not be so brazen as to claim that her husband divorced her in front of her husband when it isn't true. Says the Gemara, not a bad argument, but hani mili hecha deleka de kamesayla. That's only true when she doesn't have someone in her corner. Aval hecha de mesayla meiza o meiza. But here she hired Shimon the shliach. She already engaged Shimon to be in her corner, and therefore she's not alone, and therefore it's more likely for her to be me'iza, and more likely for her to say something that's brazen in front of her husband, and maybe Shitaka will lie. And therefore, let's review the last 15, 20 lines. It's a simple case where a woman claimed that she received her get and then lost it. So the din is she's not divorced. We don't trust her. We don't trust the husband. We don't trust the shliach. Nobody. She's not divorced, and they have to start over again. Fascinating case, because it seems to break a lot of rules up until this Mishnah that we started with today on the bottom of Samach Beis Amud Beis, Samach Gimel Amud Beis, where the Mishnah teaches us that we actually need to have 2 Eidim watch the Masira, because at least according to our Mishnah, Eidim Masira Karti, what actually brings about a closure to the marriage, what actually severs the husband from the wife, is the witnessing of the Masira, of the get to her. Next Mishnah, Samach Daled Amud Beis, 7 lines down, give or take, maybe six lines. Na'ara me'urasa, a young girl who is engaged. He ve'avia mekablan es gita. Both she, the Na'ara me'urasa, and the father on her behalf are able to receive a get. Rabbi Yehuda, I disagree. Ein shtei yadayim zochos ke'achas. Fascinating idea. You cannot have 2 different people be recipients for a get for the same marriage. You can't do that, one or the other. Ella aviha mekabel es gita bilvad, and therefore, if a man who's married to a na'ara me'urasa walks over to her with a perfectly kosher get and says, here, she says, I hate you, thank you very much, they're still married, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because only the father is able to receive. So that's machlokes tanaim. Are we allowed to have shtei yado zochos? According to the Tanna Kama, there's no problem with both the na'ara me'urasa and the father being recipients for the get. Masha'en came, according to Rabbi Yehuda, only one person can receive, and it's the father. And as well, the second din of our Mishnah, v'chol she'ena yechola lishmor es gita, ena yechola lehiskaresh. Any woman who's not able to be shomer her get is not able, says the Gemara, to get divorced. Asks the Gemara, b'mai kamiflage, what is the machlokes in the beginning of our Mishnah, where the Tanna Kama holds that 2 people are able to be recipients of the get, and Rabbi Yehuda, the counterpart, holds that only one person can? Says the Gemara, Rabbanan Savre, Yada Yiserta, Zachi la Rachmana. So the Rabbanan have a svara, that when it comes to the Na'ara Me'urasa, the Torah gave her a second set of hands to help her get divorced. She's in a precarious situation. She's young. How knowledgeable of halacha can she be? And it makes sense that she should have a little bit of a support. And therefore, both she and her father can put their hands out to receive a get. However, says the Gemara, a third of the way down, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, b'makom aviha yadila lav klumi. Up against the backdrop of her father, who can get her married and get her divorced, she is a zero in this regard. She has no weight to carry at all, and only the father can be the recipient of a get that would end up divorcing this Na'ara Me'urasa. What about the second part of our Mishnah that discussed a certain minimum threshold that a woman, in order for her to get divorced, has to be shomer es gita? So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, "V'chol she'enu yachol lishmor es gita tanu rabbanan. Kitana hayodas lishmor es gita miskareshes." A young girl who knows how to take care of her get, she knows where it is, or whatever the age is. So let's call it 10. I don't know, depends on the kid. Let's say that you have an organized 10-year-old. So that organized 10-year-old might know exactly where the get is at all times. Good. Then she can get divorced. However, if she's not able to hold on to the get, it's not she doesn't need to hold on to the get for the future. She just needs to have a cup. She needs to be able to have decision-making ability. She needs to have a certain sophistication. So we're using this as a litmus test. Ve'ezo hi kitana yodas lishmor es gita. How can we measure who is a girl who is able to be shomeres es gita? So the Gemara says as answer number one, kol shem mishameres gita v'davar acher. Whoever can watch a get and something else. No idea what this means, says the Gemara. Mai ka'amar, amar Rav Yochanan hachi kamar. Kol shem mishameres davar acher machmas gita. Someone who's able to watch something in place of her get. Meaning if she loses her get, she can then watch another thing in its stead. The Gemara does not understand this at all. Forget about Asuda. We also don't understand it, that's for sure. But the Gemara also, our not understanding is not always a raya. But the Gemara says over here, nobody understands this. Maski Flora Huna Bar Manoach. If she lost her get, and now she found a little trinket that she knows how to be shomeres, hashota be'almahi. That's not, that person has no das at all. That's nothing. That person's like flippant about a get. They're not recognizing the chashivas of what's going on here. She's not subject to divorce. So therefore, that can't be what davar acher means. What's the case of davar acher? The Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, and we'll be going to the top of Samach Hem Amud Aleph 4 lines down. The Gemara says, Ela Amar Rav Huna bar Manoach mishmei de Rav Acha berei de Rav Ika. Kol shemavchenes ben gita ledavar acher. What it means is a girl who can distinguish between a get and a contract. She knows what she's looking at. You know, I was just combing through Shemus in my house the other day. You have to know what you're looking at to be mavchen. What can go in the garbage? What can go in Shemus? What can be put in a plastic bag and thrown out? All of these are sugyas. So if this girl could look at a document and say, this is the get. This is different than the piece of Shemus on the floor. If she can distinguish, that's what the Gemara means. That's when her koach of distinction is what makes her eligible to be in the divorced category. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi, Seror v'zorko. If you have a child who sees a rock and throws it, but in contrast, egos vinotlo, but they see a pistachio and they don't throw it, they keep it. So that's the power of distinction. That's being mavchen ben gita l'davar acher. So therefore, we see zoche la'atzmo. Then that person is able to have they can be zoche something, they can earn something. But ve'ein zoche la'acherim, they're not able to be mezaka things to others, but they themselves have the power to be zoche for themselves. Let's say there was a chayfet umachzir la'achar shah. Let's say that I say to someone, you can borrow this for 25 minutes, and the person gives it back at the end of 25 minutes. That's also a certain power of distinction and a certain level of responsibility. There too, zoche bein la'atzmo uvein la'acher. That's even a higher level of responsibility. So according to this approach in the Gemara, these are Amoraim talking, because Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi, a very early Amoraim. And the Gemara says that if you have the lower level of distinction, you can separate a rock on the ground from a walnut one level up. You can be zoche, you can get something, but you can't be mizake. But if you're able to take something, someone says, take this for a short amount of time, give it back on time, and you could, that's another level of distinction. And therefore, the Gemara says that even there, uvein la'acherim, I can also be makna things back to other people. And the Gemara shows that one of these approaches might be questionable. Ki amrisa kame de Shmuel, when this was presented in front of Shmuel, and remember that Rabbi Yehuda learned under Shmuel. First he learned under Rav, and then he learned under Shmuel. This little episode is when he's with Rav Asi. I don't know that he properly learned under Rav Asi. I'm not sure, but he certainly heard this line from Rav Asi. But when he got back to Shmuel, he said to Shmuel, here's what I heard from Rav Asi. What do you think? So Amar Li, Shmuel responded back to Rabbi Yehuda and said, David da achasi. Those two cases, namely, the child's capacity to distinguish between a tzuror and an egos, as well as the case of chafetz umachzir lachar shah, they have the same halacha. You distinguished and said that in the first case he cannot be mezakeh, in the second case he can be mezakeh. But over here we don't see that. So what does Shmuel actually hold? My Davida achasi. What does Shmuel hold is Davida, that it's the same halacha in both cases. Amar Rav Chizda explains the shita of Shmuel and says, in both cases, even in the case of chefetz umachzir lachar shah, even there he says he's ein zochel le'acherim. So we have a machlokas between Rav Yehuda on the one side and Shmuel on the other, really between Rav Asi and Shmuel. Rav Asi held that if a person has the capacity to take something for a short amount of time and give it back on time, if a child can do that, and I can say as a dad that that's not always simple to rely upon a child to do that, so then that's a higher level of sophistication. Rav Yehuda wanted to be more makel and say that child can even be mezakeh something to others. Shmuel argues and says, no, there is no distinction in sophistication between the two cases of tzuror and egos on the one side and chefetz umachzir la'achar shah. But the Gemara has a problem with this. Masiv Rav Chinana Vardan. Vardan is possibly a place. What does Rav Chinana say? Let's talk about a case of shitufei mavuos. They have a bunch of chatzeros that dump into a mavui, and these people all want to carry. So what they have to do is make shitufei mavuos. We learned about this in Maseches Eruvin a long time ago, and we also came across it apparently in the Durham, which I don't remember at all. Says the Gemara, Ketzad mishtatfin b'mavui. How do we do a shitufei mavuos? Maniach es hachavis. We take a barrel. The Omer, and this person who places the barrel says, Harezu l'chol b'nei hamavui. This is for everyone. That's the appropriate way to place a mavui. And the Gemara says, Umezakeh lahem, that there is someone who's able to be mezakeh to others. Al yedei bino uvito hagdolim. My older children, male or female, are allowed to be mezakeh the rabbin. They're the ones who can place the shitufei mavuos. Al yedei avdo v'shivcha soha ivrim. And it can also be placed by Yiddish slaves. Now that's a problem. Says the Gemara, Hashivcha heichidami. What is the Metzias? What is the age of this Shivcha? And the Gemara says, Ide asya shtei sairos. If this Shivcha had reached the early stages of puberty and there are 2 pubic hairs, so ma boya gabe. That person goes free. She's no longer a shivcha at that age. Once she's showing shtei sairos, she's no longer a shivcha. What must be the case? Elalav delo asya shtei sairos. It must be that she hasn't grown any hair. And what do we see, nevertheless, in this Mishnah by shitufei mavuos? The katani zochel le'acherim, and that is a kashya on the sheet of Shmuel. What did Shmuel say? Shmuel said in both cases, both in the case of distinguishing between a tzuror and an egos, and in the case of giving someone an object, a chafetz to watch, and he's machzir lachar shah. In both of those cases, Shmuel wanted to say ein zoche. Here we see zoche la'acher. The Gemara says that's not a raya. Why not? 2 lines from the bottom of Samach Dalet Amud Beis. Shiny shitufei mavuos. There's a difference in regards to the case of mavui, because that case is derabanan. So says the Gemara, great distinction. And Amar Rav Chizda, Ishtik Vardan. Vardan, he was silent because Rav Chinana Vardan was the one who brought this brisa that taught us the shaila against Shmuel. Shmuel had said that this child cannot be mezakeh to others. Rav Chinana wanted to say in the brisa, yes, we can. They pushed back on him and said, your case of shitufei mavuos is derabanan, and he had nothing to say back. So he was like, oh, I guess I'm wrong. Says the Gemara, last line of Samach Dalet Amud Beis, my havalela meimar. What should Rav Chinana Vardan have said? He had a great retort. Why didn't he say it? What was his response? What should have been his response? Called the Tikkun Rabbanan. Any type of din de Rabbanan that the rabbis enacted, top of Samach Hamid Aleph, ke'ein de oraisa tikkun. It should be that it's as if it's a din de oraisa. And therefore, the halachos by shitufei mavuos, even though they're a din derabanan, it was a din derabanan that's ke'ein deoraisa, and therefore we should have had a kasha on Shmuel. V'idach, what would Shmuel have said in such a case? The Gemara says, Ki amrinan called the tikkun rabbanan ke'ein deoraisa tikkun. When do we say the principle that any rabbinic enactment is similar to that of a din deoraisa? That's b'milsa de'isla ikar mina Torah. That's only true when the rabbinic injunction or the rabbinic enactment we're talking about has its roots in Chumash, has something in the Torah. However, aval milsa de lestle ikar mina Torah, for example, shitufei mavuos, which does not have roots in Chumash, in that case, we don't say kol de tikkun rabbanan ke'ein deoraisa tikkun. So even if Rav Chinan of Ardan would have piped up and used the argument of kol de tikkun rabbanan ke'ein deoraisa tikkun, Shmuel would have shot it down anyways. He would have said, we don't say kol de tikkun rabbanan ke'ein deoraisa tikkun unless there's a template in Chumash about it. And shitufei mavuos doesn't have that template. We'll stop right here at the word lo and start with Masiv tomorrow, 4 lines down on Samach Hamid Aleph. Tomorrow, Mir Hashem, we'll learn a blot and a half. Wishing you all a beautiful night.